Have you ever had the urge to eat your feelings? Of course you have. We all have. Emotional eating, especially for women, is a big deal. It's also one of the biggest reasons women fail to be successful at losing weight and getting healthy, or at least one of the biggest reasons they claim. But what if there's more to emotional eating than meets the eye? Well, the answer is probably going to surprise you. Welcome to the Feel Better, Live Free podcast brought to you by Thinlicious. I'm your host, Ruth Sukup, and here we'll talk about everything from the science of weight loss to practical tips for making your health a priority in the midst of a busy life. It's a little bit nerdy, a little bit funny, and a little bit revolutionary. So buckle up, friend, because it's about to get real. Hey there, and welcome back to the Feel Better, Live Free podcast. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ruth Sukup, and I'm the founder of Thinlicious and the creator of the Thin Adapted System, as well as the New York Times bestselling author of 7 books. And today we're going to be chatting with Ali Shapiro, who is a holistic nutritionist, integrated health coach, and the founder of Truce with Food. Ali has multiple certifications in integrated nutrition and a master's degree in organizational dynamics from the University of Pennsylvania, which essentially is an MBA in human behavior. And I think that makes her the perfect person to explain emotional eating in a way you've probably never thought about it before. It's pretty compelling stuff. So without further ado, I am so excited to be able to introduce you to today's interview guest, Ali Shapiro. Ali, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Ruth.
I'm excited to talk to you about this topic. But before we dive into all the things, tell me a little bit about you, who you are, what you do, and how you got to be doing what you are now.
Yeah, so I know that you're obsessed with gut health. So I think we have that in common. And about 20 years ago, I can't even believe I'm saying it's 20 years ago, I discovered gut health. And this was before functional medicine was big or anything, but I had been struggling with, I had been diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome, and I had acne that I had tried antibiotics, Accutane. I had a depression diagnosis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the list kept piling up. And I had gone to the time to a school called the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. This was back in 2006, almost 20 years ago.
Wow.
And had heard Dr. Mark Hyman speak. And I was like, wait, what? Like, maybe IBS isn't a lifelong diagnosis. Maybe depression isn't a lifelong diagnosis. So long story short, went down a research rabbit hole and discovered that my gut had been compromised because I had had cancer about 13 years prior. And so the chemotherapy definitely did a number on my gut. But I was so obsessed with weight loss, which I know you've gone in and out of struggling yourself, that I was just like focused on losing weight. Because at the time I grew up in the 80s and 90s like you know, it's like health equals thinness. So I was just like, okay, for me to be healthy and not have cancer come back. But the problem was the more I tried to be consistent and stay on track, the more I struggled. So my emotional eating turned into binging and et cetera. So learning about food as medicine was this complete like mindset shift. And in applying that to healing myself, I lost 15 pounds as a side effect of that. And I was like, oh my God, I healed my gut. I reversed IBS. I thought I had completely reversed my depression, but I had gotten to basically like 0, right? If I was like negative 50, I had gotten to 0. And then, so I was like, oh my God, everyone needs to know about this. Because at the time, the information just wasn't out there. But then I found after about like the 4th session with my clients, and they needed that information. And they were like, okay, this feels great. But I found with them and me, in times of extreme stress, I couldn't keep this up. So in the cancer world, when we go for our scans to see if we're still cancer-free, it's called scanxiety season, right? And at that point, I had really understood that sugar causes cancer, but then I would be binging on sugar from the time I scheduled the appointment till I got my results, which thanks to our dysfunctional healthcare system can be 6 weeks or something. And I decided to take a functional approach to falling off track. And I was like, wait a second, if my IBS and my acne and my depression for me were symptoms, not diagnosed, like not root causes, What if falling off track is a symptom of something else? And so I went to grad school at the University of Pennsylvania in Philly, where where I lived for 12 years, and really came to the conclusion that falling off track is not about willpower or discipline. It's actually about safety. Because a lot, myself and so many of my clients were so highly accomplished, so driven. I was like, wait, how can we have willpower and discipline in every area of our life except food? So that is how I created Truce with Food. And I've been doing it for 17 years full time now. So I feel like an
That's
OG, like,
amazing.
yeah, yeah.
You are an OG. Because you're right. Nobody was talking about this stuff 17 years ago. Like truly, it is, I mean, it feels like still hardly anybody is talking about it. It's still not the norm to be talking about this kind of stuff, although it's thankfully becoming more and more kind of mainstream. But I feel like we have a long way to go. A long
Yeah,
way to go.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
amazing. That's amazing. So let's dive into this because I'm absolutely fascinated by the emotional eating aspect of this and how like so how do you define emotional eating? Like first of all, like what is it?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think the way that I approach it with my clients is like when you're eating out of alignment with your goals. And I use that definition because it's a flexible definition. So like we have Christmas coming up, we have the solstice coming, all this stuff is coming up. So there are times where I'm going to want to eat cookies with my kiddo, right? My son, we're going to make cookies, right? So that is totally in alignment with my goals because that creates joy. I know how to be moderate with that now. Obviously didn't 17 years ago. So to me, it's about when you're eating something that you don't want to be, or you're eating beyond a moderate amount. Because a lot of my clients, as I'm sure in your programs, it's like, oh, after the first or second bite, then it's like I'm not enjoying it and I'm not liking myself and I'm beating myself up and it's not that enjoyable. Like I feel gross afterwards. So I think that's to me, if you're eating out of alignment with your goals,
I love
is the
that
definition of
definition,
emotion. Yeah, yeah.
which is different than anything that I've heard before. But it really does come down to that, right? Like, what do you want, and how is what you're eating affecting that or in line with that? So I love that definition. So how have you rethought that then? How do we rethink what that looks like in our lives?
Yeah. So what I mean by safety is food is safety and it makes sense. So safety is emotional health. And so if you think about it, you have two kids, two girls, right? Like from
You
the time we are born, food is coupled with attachment and belonging. And when we eat food, it can actually in our adult life stimulate attachment chemicals. So isn't that wild? Like it is
that's
hardwired. Yeah, yeah. And some of this comes from Dr. Deborah McNamara and her book Nourished, but she talked about how Maslow, who I'm sure you've heard of Maslow's hierarchy of
mhm.
needs, right?
Yep.
So Maslow didn't have the benefit of neuroscience, and Maslow had basically like, the pyramid, and your basic needs were important, and then belonging, which is emotional safety, was third. But what we now know from neuroscience is that belonging is actually the most important because as a kid, you can't get your basic needs met if someone doesn't care about you, right?
Right.
Like I couldn't take care of myself until I graduated undergrad from college, right? Like it was like, okay, took me a while to be, and I have had jobs my whole life, but like to afford a mortgage or rent or whatever, it took some time. And then the other big thing about Maslow that we need to think about with all our theorists is he actually didn't have a great relationship with his parents. So how would he ever know what safety or belonging meant? So we tie that together and we realize that food, when we are born up until pretty much, 20, is coupled with being taken care of. And so if we but the invisible thread behind that is the belonging that someone cares enough about us. And
Yeah.
so food gets coupled with this sense of when we're adults, I'm stressed, I'm overwhelmed. And what a lot of my clients do, is I'm sure you see this, is they isolate, right? And so food stimulates attachment chemicals. Oh, I feel like I'm attached to someone, but it doesn't give us the deeper belonging that we need to rest in someone's care, to rest in support. And so Dr. Deborah McNamara's mentor, Dr. Gordon Newfield, says there's nothing as addictive as something that almost works. And so it's like, oh, food almost works, but
Hmm.
it doesn't give us the inner dependence, the connection that we need. So that's what I mean by that. And I can make this practical with Ruth. When I ask you, like, what were your best memories as a kid? Best food memories as a kid?
Oh, well, I'm not the best person to ask this question.
Well, no,
Honestly.
this could be illuminating. This could be illuminating. Yeah, I would.
My my parents were terrible cooks,
Uh-huh.
and they did not cook well at all. They used the microwave for literally everything, right? Like this is the microwave in the 80s when it first came out, and it was disgusting. And it was awful. Like we had to have these family dinners. Like all I can associate with food growing up is like negative negative memories of like having to sit through these gross dinners and being forced to eat all the food on my plate. Isn't that terrible? But yeah,
No,
is
that's not.
that
No, but that's revealing of like I couldn't rest in this meal, right? Dr.
yeah,
McNamara talks about like food being a place where we can rest in, right? Where the dinner table is about, so if you didn't like the food and people were telling you to override your own sense of fullness, right? It's like
yeah,
it starts to food and belonging start to have a negative association. And I know from you, from
yeah,
your seven fear archetypes, you
yeah.
identify with the exile, with the outcast.
Outcast. Hmm.
Yes. And I
Yep.
wouldn't be surprised if some of that earliest imprint,
Oh my
yeah,
gosh, this is like a counseling session right now. But even as you're saying this, like what I was thinking actually and what it was bringing to mind is that I think because of that growing up, right, without my parents cooking good food, like food is such a way for me to show love to my family and I love to cook and I love to cook for my family and my girls like they never want to go out to eat. They always want me to cook. Like I'm always like, let's just go to a restaurant. No, mom, we want you to cook. We want your food. And my daughter is at college this year. She just went, she's a freshman in college and she's so independent. And I thought, oh, we are not going to see this girl until Thanksgiving. Like she's not coming home. We're never going to hear from her. And she has been home like 3 or 4 times already. And every time it's mom, what are you going to cook for me? Like, can you make this into the, like, it's all the food requests. That's all she wants is to just come home and eat my food. And as you're saying, I'm like, that's her because she's not emotional and she doesn't show like emotion that way, but she shows like I'm having this epiphany right now. Just about like I'm telling you, like I love doing podcasts. It's like therapy for me every time.
well, and I have chills because that speaks to because our how we eat is speaking to how we feel. And when we can't even say it. And so she's saying, I feel safe here. This
Yeah.
food is giving me more than nutrition, more than nourishing my gut health and my blood sugar, which is all important.
Yeah.
And it's nurturing the most important health metric that we actually have. We know that loneliness is like as deadly as smoking now, right? But she's saying, I want to come home here because this is about knowing that I belong here, knowing that I'm safe, I can rest here. Whereas if I'm going to college, and I don't know about you, but like when I went to college, my eating issues escalated because
Yes.
even though I only went 3.5 hours away from home, I knew some people from high school. I went to a huge high school. I went to an even bigger college. I was still like, I lost my group of friends. I don't know where I fit in, and it was just like,
Mhm.
and then
I'm
it's
so
like, oh
doing
my God, you have
all
to
of that
prove
right
yourself. Yeah.
now.
So
Yeah.
that it makes so you can see that, right? Yeah.
I'm like, oh, my little heart is like
I know.
opening
I
up for her
love
right
your
now.
daughter. Like she's
I
so
know.
wise. She's
She's
so
like, I
wise.
have to take this. So I'm like, what am I gonna
But you can
do?
see,
Okay. Oh, go ahead. Go.
yeah,
You.
so but you can see if like you're someone who loves cooking and all this stuff, and then and say, and I'm not, so I need to like get tips from you. Uh, but if you all of a sudden have to be put on a plan where they're giving you shakes or this or that, like your whole way of connecting, and it's deeper than just connection. It's like I'm communicating your love, right? Like when someone passes away, there's no words for that. What do people do? They bring food, right?
Yeah.
Right? And if we think about belonging, I mean, it really connects us to the earth and the cycles and like something bigger than us. I mean, Mama Earth is like the OG, ancestor, right? It's like, oh my God, we're all connected back to there. But so you can see how like around the holidays, if you have like big traditions and then it's like but I can't do that, or I don't know how to be moderate around it. The lack
Yes.
of belonging can then trigger more eating and all of this stuff. So it's this invisible thread that,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
know,
I mean, as you're saying this, it's so funny because I think that maybe even subconsciously, one of the cool things about our program and the way that we have it structured and the food, like the recipes and everything, because it's all stuff that I just cook for my family, right? And that's and our food is amazing, but it's like big meals. And so there's the people who are single and they're like, what do I do with all this food? Or it's like enough food for a week, one meal. But I'm like, no, eat the same as your family. Like sit down together, eat it together. Your family will love this food too because it's nourishing. This is what my family wants. This is the food they're requesting when my daughter comes home from college. This is what she's requesting. And I think that for a lot of my clients has really helped them to like, oh yeah, my husband loves this. My husband's also lost weight because he just loves the food too. And my kids eat it and it's easy and it doesn't feel like I'm deprived because that I think is such a big part of the emotion of when you're trying to be healthy or diet or like you're saying, the shakes that isolates you from eating or having to cook separate meals will isolate you from your family. And I didn't ever, I don't think I've like consciously put that together, but as you're saying that, it makes so much sense. So tell me then, like, how does the if there's so much emotion, right, that's attached to this and the safety part of this,
yeah.
does that happen no matter what type of foods you're eating? Are there some types of foods that will make it worse, will make the emotional eating worse, or is it going to happen regardless?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I just want to say too, you and I both run group programs. That's part of the magic of group programs is that you have this
Mhm.
safety and belonging of
Yes.
people who, and so it's such an important piece, especially until you can kind of, walk, you have to walk before you run. So I just
Yes.
want to like highlight that because once you see this belonging piece, you can't unsee it. It's like, oh my God,
Yes.
it's so cool.
Yeah.
So the question you're asking is like, let me ask you this. Is the question that you're saying like, is belonging always piece of this? Or like, do certain foods make us feel like we belong more? Or,
Well, I guess a little bit of all of it, right? Or maybe I haven't got to the right question yet, right? Like if this is really what it's about, is the emotional eating is about belonging and it's that food is filling that sense of belonging or almost filling it, which is making it more addictive. Are there certain foods that make it worse? Like is it worse to have sugar or because sugar in itself is addictive? You know what I mean? Or is it does it not matter? Does that
yeah.
even make
Well, I
sense?
think what's interesting, this is actually coming up in my group program right now. This is a little bit more woo or energetic, but in traditional Chinese medicine, sugar and dairy are very yin, which is associated with the female archetype, right? And not like, or the feminine, not female, but,
Yeah.
and I don't want to typecast it because I don't want people to ever really think it's like, oh, it's my mother or my father. I mean, there's some elements to that, but
Yeah.
it's expansive, right? It's expansive. And so, a lot of clients will turn to dairy when they quote unquote need mothering, right? Dairy is the
Oh.
profile of mother's milk, right? Which is again, if we go back to that origin,
Yeah.
Ruth, your face right now is like, you know?
Yeah, they can't see this. They're just listening.
So there is this need to be so emotional eating essentially is repressed feeling. Like if we're going to just be like cut down to the essential, it's repressed feeling. And we are in a culture where especially women if you have feelings you're too emotional, you're afraid of being too angry, too bitchy, too right like we know that on the surface.
Mhm.
But what I think maybe this is a great example of it's not really about the food, it's about the event that makes you feel unsafe. But we tend to turn to sugar and dairy, which could be ice cream, it could be milk chocolate, right? Whatever, when we need mothering from the quote unquote stress in our lives. But a lot of my
Interesting.
clients who, again, are pretty high achieving, they'll be like, I'm with both of my kids and I just can't handle it anymore. And I literally go in the pantry and I just find and like I eat alone. Or after everyone goes to bed at night, I'm eating alone. Or I come out from an event. And so what's happening is that eating alone is telling you again, food is always communicating the same way your daughter is like, I want to come home. I feel safe and I can rest here. Is I feel deeply alone in some way. If I'm eating alone, it's because I feel alone. I feel separate in some way. And it's usually with my client who is, stealing a break from her kids. I feel so alone in this parenting, and maybe I feel like a bad mom because I can't handle it right now, right? So it's not really about the food that she's going to, it's about I feel alone in this. Or I remember having one client, she's a very successful real estate agent, and she's like, I go out to these events and it's like I'm very good when I'm out, but like I just don't feel like I fit in there, right? Again, that
Hmm.
outcast. Like, so as soon as I come home, it's like, and then once she had this language of safety, she's like, yes, I'm safe in my house. I survived the event. Nothing went
Yeah.
wrong. But now, because I felt so alone there, I need that stimulation of attachment chemicals because it is so painful to feel like you do not belong. Even if, like me, you love your rebel identity, right? It's like,
Yeah.
thank God I rebelled against the medical system 20 years ago. Like we
Yeah.
still all need to belong with our people within some way. So I think the food is more the solution. But your question also brings up that I think like around the holidays and things that connect us to family traditions, if we understand why we're going to them, it's like, oh, this is nourishing me on a level that my soul or my spirit needs right now,
Yes.
which makes it more flexible of like if something's always good or something's bad, And again, to use the example of Christmas cookies, right? I'm gonna make Christmas cookies with my son. Now, we're probably gonna use, I love the Detoxinista. I don't know if you know her website, but she has this great icing that is like sweet potato, maple syrup, and coconut oil. And
Really?
yeah, she's amazing. I make her muffins for my son and he loves them. They're like spinach chocolate chip muffins, but they're all healthy stuff. So now are we going to use sprinkles and fun stuff? Are we going to use all the organic natural stuff? Yes. But I'm still going to make cookies with him because I did that with my mom and my sister, and
Yeah.
I want to pass that
Yeah.
along. So it gives you, when you start to understand the belonging piece, you can sort of understand the invisible thread to moderation, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah.
If
It
your
does,
blood
it
sugar's
does make
balanced,
sense.
your
It
gut health.
all like, and I truly believe that too. Like everything in moderation. And I do Christmas cookies with my girls every year too. We do those like frosted ones with all the
Yeah, I'll
decorations
probably do some
and
buttercream too. I mean,
we do
we're
all the
not
stuff. And
purging it.
I think they're gross. I've always thought they're gross. I don't, that one is not a temptation for me, but they love them and they're going to eat way too many of them. But yeah, it's just like, so we talked about kind of like, so it all comes down to safety. Is there any other part? Like, are there other triggers that happen? Is safety the main trigger, or how does that work?
Well, I mean, I think it's the stuff that you and I both talk about. I mean, blood sugar and gut health matter too, right? Because if we look at safety and we expand that beyond emotions, there's physical safety, right? Does my
Mhm.
body feel like it has the nutrition it needs to keep the lights on and to thrive? And so, you can get into more of like, okay, well, this is why it's better to eat dessert after dinner. So your blood sugar is more balanced, right? There can be, and that's kind of where it's naturally served anyways. It's not like you have to be the outcast because you decide you want dessert after dinner. But I think there is a soul level. And again, the soul, which is just spirit, is kind of how we're all one and detached, but soul is how we're attached. And it's how we're quirky, we're unique. And it's how our body, soul speaks in metaphor, which is when I talk about people eating in alone, right? That's them saying, I feel on some individualistic level, like really out of my depth, out of my comfort zone, that I don't belong in some way. And so that's just, you can just learn that through how you're eating, not what you're eating, but how you're eating.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a little bit more like that might be its own podcast episode, but I do think one of the things that I give to clients is when they're not hungry, right? When they're not physically hungry, it's like the first thing I want them to ask is, why does this make sense? Instead of beating yourself up and being like, oh, I just really want 20, Christmas tree cookies. Like, oh, I hate myself. How do I fix this? Start by saying, why does this make sense? And all of a sudden, you realize that you're going to that for a really brilliant reason. We all need to feel like we belong. We all need to feel like we have that emotional safety. And then one of the first things that I have people ask is like, what's at the tail end of my food noise? And the four triggers are, am I feeling tired? Right? Am I
Mhm.
feeling anxious, which is uncertainty from the outside. So we know, for example, COVID emotional eating skyrocketed because people were like,
Mhm.
what is happening? what's going on. And people, a lot of belonging was fractured during that time
Yes.
because of different ideas of what was happening and who was masking, who wasn't, right? It was just a very contentious time. But people also, I'm thinking of my clients. I mean, they have so much uncertainty in their own lives, right? Like your daughter just left for college. Like that's a huge transition. Transitions bring up tons of uncertainty, and it's a lot of time when people fall off track. So, am I feeling uncertain or anxious, uncertain? The other big one is inadequacy. So, the tail, TAI. Where do I feel not enough, too much? And this is where the uncertainty is coming from the inside of the house. The call is happening. It's what people think of as self-doubt. I feel too
Mhm.
much. I feel not enough. Maybe I don't want to eat everything my family's telling me, and then I don't want to finish my plate. And especially as kids, just how we develop, we make it about us being wrong rather than like, whoa, maybe people shouldn't be forcing us to overeat, right? Um,
Yes.
and then the last
Those
one,
fish in the microwave.
yeah, yeah.
It should
And
never be
then
cooked in the microwave ever.
yeah. Right? It's so rubbery. Um, yeah, I'm just thinking of anyone listens to this outside of the US, they're like, "Oh my God, the horror."
I know. It's a trauma, I'm telling
I
you.
know. This is a side note, but I worked in Paris in the corporate life. I worked in Paris for a while and I was obsessed with dieting and I would eat peanut butter and jelly on rice cakes and the French women would be like, "What is that, Ali?" Like and they were like pitying me and looking back I pity myself, but I was like, "No, this is like healthy." And they were just like horrified by like rice cakes with peanut butter and jelly. Um and then the L is loneliness. And this is just, we feel separate and alone in a way that ultimately we feel like our needs don't matter, whether it's our appetite, whether it's the needs that make us feel so alone, etc. So I think people can start to, and if you think about those tail triggers, deregulated blood sugar will cause those too, right? It's like, okay, I feel exhausted when I'm crashing. I feel
Mhm.
anxious, anxiety from crashing blood sugar. If you don't know what foods work for you, how to your blood sugar, and you're so hungry and have cravings, you start to feel like your body's broken, that you're inadequate versus like you're just not eating the right foods for you.
Yes.
And then loneliness, whether it's, I don't like what my family's eating, or I went to this event and felt so lonely. It felt on some level that like I, I didn't feel significant in those experiences. So, and again, we can feel that when our blood sugar is crashing as well. So,
Or when your gut is unhealthy,
for sure.
and especially with the serotonin, like all of these things, the anxiety and the loneliness and the depression, as you were talking about, all contributes to that as well. So it's a weird physical emotional connection that really does work together, and sounds like it makes it a lot worse, right? Like there's an emotional component, but it's not all emotional. There is physiological reasons why you're feeling worse, or why you're feeling more tired, why you're feeling more anxious, why you're feeling more
Yes.
lonely. That is like, this is a little bit mind blowing.
Yeah, I mean, I tell people to think about it as like an infinity loop. Like we separate physiology and psychology, but they're
Mm-hmm.
actually just in this feedback loop
So
because
connected.
yeah, I mean, if you even think about gut health, like if you feel really alone, like think about after COVID and you feel really alone and then you start isolating more, right? We know that your gut microbiome is so much healthier when it's around diversity, around other people.
Yes.
And this is why all of us were like extra sick the first couple years we came out of lockdowns, right? I mean, you're in Florida, you guys had a different experience
We
probably, but
got lockdowns.
yeah, okay, yeah. But us in the Northeast, we did.
Yes.
And so it was like, oh my God, our microbiomes were not as healthy because we were so isolated. So that's
Yeah.
just one example of how everything is
Yeah.
interconnected. We're meant to be together. We are tribal people. I always think of like, I don't know if you've ever watched Animal Planet, but you can just feel the psychological terror, like when one of the animals gets like separated from their pack. You're like, especially like a little kid, I'm like, no, no, like go where there's people, go where your herd is. Because I would feel that way if I was like stuck
Yeah.
on the tundra by myself. It's like you can't survive alone. And so yeah, it's all kind of saying the same thing, but it's just about what entry point you come into it.
Yeah, so interesting. So can you share a little bit about Truce with Food? That's your program that you started, and what does
Yeah.
that look like? And how do people get out of this infinity loop? If it's an infinity loop, like
Yeah.
how do you stop the cycle?
Yeah. Great question. So Truth with Food, it's a 6 month process because it takes that long for a holistic solution. But essentially, what we do is we look at the story. We all have a story about how we have to be good to belong. And so what we do on the very first session is we set up goals in a very process oriented way to allow for this flexibility that we talk about. It's not rigid rules of like if you wanted to lose 30 pounds, it would be like, well, who do you have to be to lose 30 pounds? Okay, I want to be someone who has more compassion for myself when I fall off track so that I don't do chuck it. I don't know if we can swear on this podcast, but that's what we call it in truth. We like the chuck it effort eating. And so, but the reason we can't make progress with these goals is there's a story that if we weren't to do our bad habits, which are actually protective, it brings up all this emotion and this story of like, I'm being bad this way.
Mm.
So we uncover that story in the first session, and then that builds on the second session, which is how are we more conscious of this story? So our story is unconscious not because it's dark and deep, but just because your body's always taking shortcuts, right? Like I tell my clients, like if you had to understand what a shower and a toothbrush was every morning, like it would take like a long time to get out of the door. Like you just have to know, I go shower or this or that. So our stories are always scanning, am I being good? Am I bad? Right? What does other people think? And again, that's a healthy developmental spot. We need that the first couple decades of our life so people care about us. But the way that we often can recognize our story is kind of through a cognitive lens of like, I'm behind with my calories, or I'm behind with losing weight, or I'm missing out on good foods, or catastrophizing, or I know you talk a lot about people pleasing, and I talk about how that's actually a protective strategy. So like,
Mm.
oh my God, if I'm disappointing people, or if I'm not deprived, I'm not doing it right, all of these things. So I teach people on the second lesson how to like more access their story on an everyday conscious level. And then what we do is, and then that leads into, okay, how do I start to change this? And we call it self-authoring in developmental psychology. So here's what I learned was good, right? And most of us as women have learned overall a strategy of restriction is good emotionally. So don't take up too much space, don't add more stress, just do it by yourself, all that kind of stuff. So we start to
Anybody
say,
out?
what?
Mhm. Don't put anybody out.
Yes. And that is just like an emotional restriction strategy, right?
Mhm.
So then we start in a very methodical way experimenting with, okay, where is it safe to start to try to show up differently? And teaching people how to do that, because when you're stressed, and I'm asking you to show up differently in stress situations, your old story will just kind of take you back to the habits you've always done. So that is about 3 months of the program, is like really learning how to like self-author and it's what we call self-author belonging. So it's like your example with, I love to cook homemade meals for my family. Like my family may have done it this way and I can still connect with them on other ways, but this is how I'm going to do it, right?
Yeah.
You and I are both entrepreneurs, right? I mean, I love my parents. My parents were city school teachers, but it's like I chose a different path of that. I mean, I'm essentially a teacher just online, but you know what I mean? But like I had to do it my own way.
Right.
So it's really learning like, how do I want to show up in these everyday situations? And so then the second half of the program is learning about blood sugar and gut health. And I do it more through an experimental lens. So I use nervous systems, parasympathetic, sympathetic for discernment around what's the best diet for people. But it's more self-authored. So it's people wanting to make the choice because they've connected, okay, if I eat this breakfast, oh my God, my ADHD is better, my moods are better, my cravings are gone. This is life changing versus me giving a plan.
Yes.
And so that's
So
how we,
interesting.
yeah, because the
So there's so
safety,
much psychology that comes into it first before you're even talking about food. That's
yeah,
amazing.
because yeah, the food stuff is open, is like the content is already open, and I teach on it the second half, but everyone comes in a different place. Some people are like, I can't even look at the food right now. Like I know this is emotional. I don't know what's happening, and this is where my focus needs to be. And some people are like, oh my God, but I'm hungry all the time. So we by the end of 3 months, everyone's ready to look at it. And they're also more open to, hey, maybe this idea, what I thought was good, isn't really good, right? Like a lot of people, I don't know if in your group, but I have a lot of people who have tried to be vegetarian, and nothing against vegetarian, but it just doesn't work for everyone. And so
Right.
once they start getting a more
I'm
focused,
totally anti-vegetarian after being a vegetarian for 28 years. And
okay.
people are like, "You're not vegetarian friendly." I'm like, mm-mm. Nope. And here's the podcast on why I'm no longer a vegetarian.
Yeah, I try as a cancer in the, 20 years ago, cancer survivors were told like be vegetarian. And I had so many cravings, hunger, I mean, acne issues, IBS, depression, all the stuff. However, it does work for some people. And so people then are more open to like, okay, maybe I can actually depend on my body instead of listening to all the conflicting, because nutrition information is so conflicting.
Yes.
And so that's what the program is, and it's 12 group calls with me, and then I have truth certified coaches, so I certified people in my methodology. So people also get small group attention, and it's a smaller group, so everyone can get individual attention, but have the benefit of the group. And I joke, it's basically, I mean, the quality of people who come, it's amazing, and we make it a safe container. And safety isn't like, oh, everyone has to think the same or whatever, but it's just like we don't give people advice. You trust that people can figure this out with the right questions. Um, but I joke that it's a container to practice being quote unquote needy, right? Like people, anytime women have needs, they feel like they're being needy. So
Yeah.
it's a safe space to practice that. And the group is I think 50% of why people get like the life-changing results. I mean, we have people who have binged for 20, 30 years. No one who's in an active eating disorder, I don't like that would not be, Truth with Food would not be the right place for people that, but people who have recovered from eating disorders and are still struggling now with health issues or whatever, because they
Mhm.
had to have a period of, not paying attention. Or people are just like, I've hit a big period of uncertainty and my food stuff has come back. It's not quite as bad, but it's a lot of people who are ready just to go to the next level with their personal development, and the safety that helps with is just, it's just incredible. The people that are
Amazing. It's amazing. And I don't know if you feel this way, but like I've done lots of different things in my 15 plus years as an entrepreneur. And I think that helping women get healthy and transform their lives through health has been by far the most rewarding thing that I've ever done. Like it is so insanely amazing because you're so right. It's not just food. It's not just people come to me because they're like, I just want to get skinny, right? Like, but you still got to deal with the head stuff because that's never going to go away. And if you're not dealing with that, then so it has to be kind of the whole package. But then you see the transformation that happens when you start to empower yourself, and those two things work so hand in hand. So I love it. So Ali, you're doing amazing work.
Thanks.
Congratulations. Where can we find you online?
Yeah, yeah. And so just if anyone is interested, Truth with Food is launching in January. So January
Okay.
2nd through the 22nd. And I can put a link, I can send you the link for a free event we're doing around how to stop the quick fix cycle, because it essentially leaves you worse off. And so that's on January 8th, about how we set goals in Truth with Food. So that workshop will be how to set goals for sustainable results. And it is, like you said, it's about the psychology.
Yeah,
So
we'll
people
put
can
the links for everything in the show notes too.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'll send that to you. So yeah, alishapiro.com. And then I have my own podcast, Insatiable, which people can check out as well. So thanks so much for
Awesome.
having me,
Well,
Ruth.
thank you so much for being here, Ali. It was great talking to you, and Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to you too.
All right, guys, that about does it for this episode. Remember that you will find the link to Ali's website as well as the link to her podcast and her workshop in the show notes, everything that we talked about. So be sure to check that out. And of course, if you know someone else who might be interested in this topic, please be sure to send this episode their way. Then be sure to subscribe to the podcast to be notified of future episodes. And I will see you back here for another new episode very soon.